So my book, Geronimo and Sitting Bull, Leaders of the Legendary West, came out May 1st. It was published by Two Dot, which is a subsidiary of Roman and Littlefield. It's the third in my Legendary West series. First was Wyatt Earp Bat Masterson, Lawman, a Legendary West, and then came out Billy the Kid and Jesse James. I went to the dark side. And so then Geronimo and Sitting Bull's third in the series, and spoiler alert right now, in May next year, I'll have one on Wild Bill and Buffalo Bill coming out. So those are the four right now. I don't have contracts for more, but hopefully there'll be something out there. I don't know. So anyway, I want to go through some of the books that are out there on Geronimo and then some of the books on Sitting Bull and tell you a little bit about them. This first one, Geronimo, is his autobiography. And it's a really good book. I think you might be able to find a reprint of it, but it's hard to come by. But imagine that Geronimo was speaking Apache and also Spanish to his nephew, who acted as translator, translating it into English. And then the guy that wrote it in English, we believe, embellished a little bit. So it might be close to what he was saying, but there's probably, as I said, embellishments in that book. Next book I wanted to tell you about that I used was Robert Utley. Probably a lot of you that study history know about Robert Utley. He's written a lot of books about the West. And this is a very good book on Geronimo. I think one of the fallbacks of the books is that he first tells the story from the Chiricahua Apache side, and then he tells
the value of U.S. dollars goes up.
Then
you watch the CNN.
Somebody needs to turn the mic off out there. So anyway, where was it? Oh, yeah, the Chiricahua Apache side, and then he tells the same story again from the Army side. So it can get a little confusing at times. This book, From Cochise to Geronimo, is an excellent book. It's very thick, and it really goes into a lot of detail out there. Edwin Sweeney did a great job, and he did a lot of work down in Mexico, looking at Mexican sources. I want to talk about this book, The Black Legend, by my good friend Doug Hocking. He marked that he was going to be here tonight on the internet. So in case he's out there, hi Doug, and here's your book. It's a very good book. It talks about what's called the Bascom Affair. It's the Army tried to capture the Apache leader Cochise. It didn't work, and from that point on, the Apaches did not trust the Americans, and war broke out after that, lasted for years and years. Very good book. And then also someone who might be out there, Michael Farmer. Michael wrote this book, Geronimo, Prisoner of Lies, and it goes into the years that Geronimo was a prisoner of war of the United States. In fact, he and the rest of the Chiricahuas were considered prisoners of war up until his death. So if we switch to Sitting Bull, I think one of the significant books out there is this one, My Friend the Indian by James McLaughlin. Now McLaughlin was the agent at Standing Rock at the time of Sitting Bull, and McLaughlin and Sitting Bull did not get along. There was a power struggle between them, and I would say that McLaughlin really trashes Sitting Bull in this book. So I think it's, the name is a misnomer, My Friend the Indian, when he was basically Sitting Bull's enemy. But that was the first book that really came out on Sitting Bull, and a lot of people got their information from that book, and they thought Sitting Bull was kind of a bad guy from that. Well, the next book that came out that I think is significant is the Book of the American Indian by Hamlin Garland. How many people here should know about, since he lived here in the state, Hamlin Garland? Anyway, this is historical fiction, this book. What Garland did was he went around to the various reservations at the turn of the 20th century and wrote about the conditions on the reservations at the time. If you haven't read it, it's a very good book. And he has a novella in there called The Silent Eaters. And it's all about Sitting Bull. And it really shows Sitting Bull in a good light. And it was the first of really bringing back Sitting Bull's true character was this book, The Book of the American Indian. Now, after that, Stanley Vestal wrote Sitting Bull, Champion of the Sioux, and this book became the definitive biography of Sitting Bull for years and years and years, and it's a great book if you have not read it. After that, again, here comes Robert Utley, and he wrote The Lance and the Shield about Sitting Bull, and this too is an excellent book that I highly recommend if you've not read that. And finally, Sitting Bull, His Life and Legacy by Ernie Lapointe, and Ernie Lapointe was he's the great grandson of Sitting Bull, and again, this is an excellent book, and you really get a perspective from the family on Sitting Bull and who he was as a person. So those are just a few of the many sources that I went through. I like to try to get out to sites, if I can, to look at the territory. This is down in Arizona in the Chiricahua Mountains there, and this is territory that Geronimo and a lot of the other Chiricahuas were in. In fact, this was part of the Chiricahua Reservation at one time until it was taken away. There was some rough areas that we went through. If you can read that sign, if you can, it says, travel caution, smuggling and illegal immigration may be encountered in this area. So we didn't see any, but I thought it was a fun sign to take a picture of. It was really, you can't tell, but it was really windy that day. Well, we also went to Fort Bowie, which was significant in Geronimo's life. And you have to get there by taking a trail. I can't remember how long, it's a couple miles or something like that, but it's kind of a cool trail back there. My friends in Arizona took me to a lot of these places, Doug Hocking and a few others, and it was fun to do. So from this scene, you can see the fort from above, some of the buildings down through here. But again, a significant place in the life of Geronimo. This is what was the San Carlos Reservation on the White River Reservation, San Carlos Agency on the White River Reservation. You can see the buildings down below there. Their experience the drought at the time, a lot of this is underwater. So we were, from that aspect, fortunate that we could get in there. Foreground is Doug Hocking, who helped me fact check my work. And off to the left is Carol Markstrom. She also worked at San Carlos for, not here, but the modern day San Carlos for years teaching school there. So they both helped me with my book. Of course, with Sitting Bull, I went to several sites. Of course, this is the Little Bighorn, if you've not been there, a very, very significant site. I think the marker out there that's black is supposedly where Custer fell. These are markers where they found the bodies, but they're not actually buried right there. And then if you get out there during the anniversary of the Battle of Little Bighorn, the real birds put on a great pageant of just Native American history and the battle itself. And this is a scene from that with Medicine Tail Coulee on the other side of the Little Bighorn River there. I was fortunate to be taken out by Blaine Norvold. I should stick with my notes here. Blaine Norvold and Deanne's bear standing to the Grand River where Sitting Bull had his last home, right here along the Grand River. His home would have been up in this area up here. And then here's the marker of the site of his home and where he was killed by the Indian police later on. But it's pretty neat. If you've ever gotten out there, it's really a pretty neat place. I can see what is beautiful. I can see why you wanted to live there, and kind of a pretty special place. Well, in my book, I don't have standard photographs. I was asked to have illustrations created to show various scenes of what happened in both these men's lives. And so Jim Hatzell, who's an artist in Rapid City, he did the illustrations for my first 2 books, and I was able to get him to do the illustrations for Geronimo and Sitting Bull. Jim and I have been good friends since we met on the set of Dances with Wolves. He's done a lot of work with Old West and Native American knows clothing and everything. So I was really happy to get him to illustrate this. So most of the rest of the slides here are going to be his illustrations from out of the book, and I'll go through them with you. Well, I think one of the significant things about Geronimo and Sitting Bull is that they didn't want to change their culture. They were happy with the way things were. They wanted to live their lives the way they were. But, you know, after they were surrendered to the federal government, their lives were not their own anymore. The government told them exactly where they were going to go, what they were going to do, who they could see, that sort of thing. And I think it really drives home, if you read the book, it really drives home the point that we really do need to cherish our individual rights in this country. So what I like to do is first go quickly through Geronimo's life, and then I'd like to go through Sitting Bull's life. Geronimo, he lived from approximately 1829 to 1909. He was brought up in the traditional Chiricahua Apache way of life. When he earned his status as a warrior, he was allowed to marry. And the girl that he wanted to marry, her father told him he needed to bring in a huge string of horses in order, that was the tradition at the time, horses for the daughter. And so he went out, he didn't have the horses, but he went out and stole them. So this is a scene of him driving the horses in to marry his wife. And they got married. They had 3 children. And then the Apaches would be in what is now Arizona. And of course, they would go down into Mexico. And they went out down into Chihuahua and town down there by the name of Llanos. They were invited into the town. The men were all in town partying with the citizens in town, while the women and children and a few guards were out at their encampment. The Mexican troops ambushed them and killed everybody, a lot of the women, and took a lot of them prisoners. Geronimo's wife, his 3 kids, and his mother were all killed in that attack. And from that time on, Geronimo hated Mexicans. He just despised them. And, you know, if he found out you were Mexican, you know, look out. and it was that way for the rest of his life. However, after his wife was killed, he remarried, and he remarried, and he remarried, he remarried. We're not really sure how many times. Some scholars say he had up to 9 wives. Other scholars say 12, maybe more. And most of them were not at the same time, but I don't know. So anyway, one of the things that was special about Geronimo was he had what was called power. To the Apaches, God was power, and different people could be given certain powers. And so one of the powers that Geronimo got was that his special power was that he could say what was happening long distance from where he was at that point in time. And this happened several times. And so people believed that he had this special power to know, you know, we're here right now. He could know what's going on right now out in Rapid City without having a cell phone or anything like that. He was also, a voice also told him after his family had been killed and after he prayed for his sister's son to be healed from his sister was pregnant. It was a difficult delivery, and he prayed and everything came out okay. But a voice came to him and said that he would never be killed in battle. And time again, in battle, he would be wounded, or people thought he was going to be killed, but he always escaped. And so his knowledge of what was going on long distance and this ability to escape death made him be somebody that people would follow at the time. He was never considered what we would call, a misnomer, a chief or anything like that, but people would follow him on raids and that sort of thing because of his special powers. And he was good at hiding from whether they're American troops or Mexican troops. He was good at hiding from them, although he did get caught from time to time. Well, Geronimo was friendly with Americans. In fact, he really liked Americans from the time of when we took over the Southwest of the U.S. When they were surveying with the Gadsden Treaty, they were surveying the Mexican and American border. Geronimo came upon them, and he very friendly with the Americans, and he was friendly with them up until the time that the Americans tried to capture Cochise. And then from that point on, Cochise was a major Chiricahua Apache leader. From that time on, the Apaches were at war with the white troops. Up until the early 1870s, when General O.O. Howard created a peace treaty with Cochise and gave them what was considered the Chiricahua Reservation, which was some of the shots I showed you in the Chiricahua Mountains, which is what their homeland was. They lived high up in the mountains. They didn't live down in the deserts. They lived in the mountains. So everything was going along well there. They had peace with the Americans, but not the Mexicans. And the Mexicans didn't like it because they would stay on the reservation and then, sweep down into Mexico and wreak havoc down there. But a couple of Americans were killed around the reservation there, and it gave the federal government the excuse to do away with the Chiricahua Reservation. And so they took it away, and they said that everybody had to go to San Carlos that I showed you earlier. And as you can see, San Carlos was kind of a wasteland at that time too. Well, Geronimo said he wasn't going to do that and slipped away into Mexico. He said from that time on, he started attacking Americans again from time to time. There are times of peace, times of war, and I don't have enough time to get into all that, or we'd be here all night. But Geronimo said that if the federal government had lived up to its promises, he would have remained peaceful. If they would have allowed them to keep the Chiricahua Reservation, he would have remained peaceful. So as I said, he would come back into this is one of the famous photos of him, by the way. When he came back into the United States, there was an agent by the name of John Clum who sent a message to Geronimo, and he said, "I want to talk to you." And so this is a shot of Geronimo coming in to talk with Clum. Unknowns to Geronimo, it was a trap. Clum had police surround Geronimo and his people. He had women and children with him when he came in to talk. They surrounded him and threw Geronimo into jail for about a month. And nobody would press charges. There were no charges against him, but he still threw him in jail. And no one brought charges against him. So after a month, Clum was gone, and the new agent that came in said, "Well, let's release him from jail." So Clum didn't like Geronimo. Geronimo didn't like Clum after that. So for the next 10 years, Geronimo would sometimes be on the reservation, sometimes he'd go down into Mexico for years, and then the army would go down and try to find him and course him back. This is an illustration of General George Crook, who Crook always liked to go out hunting on his own. And they're trying to get Geronimo to come in. They're down in Mexico. He's out bird hunting, and he gets, all of a sudden, all these Apaches rise up around him out of this grass and surround him. and it was Geronimo and his leaders. And they walk with Crook back to camp and then start holding peace negotiations with him. Well, they could have killed him right then and there, but they didn't. And what's funny is Crook never admitted that this happened. And but it made, you know, all the men knew in camp, and newspapers found out about it, and the Apaches all told about it, but Crook would never admit that it happened. I just as a side, you'll find Crook down there. You'll find him up here with the Lakotas up here and down there. He always talked a good game. It was like he always promised the Native Americans everything, but he never lived up to his promises. I mean, I came to not like him very much, but a lot of people think of him as this great peacemaker and everything, but I don't think so, in my mind. It's my own personal opinion. Well, after 10 years of being on the run, and he was never captured. He negotiated his surrender. And finally in 1886, he surrendered. And most of the Chiricahuas had been shipped off to Florida. They wanted to get him out of Arizona. And so they shipped him to Fort Pickens, I believe, and Fort Marion in Florida. And Geronimo wanted to be with his family, so he came in with his final band, and they surrendered. 1886, they're sent to Florida. This is a picture of Geronimo and a couple others, Nachi, waiting for the train at Bowie to head east to Florida. And, you know, no one told him what was going to really happen to him. All he was guaranteed was that he would be with his family. And it took years and years for him to actually be with his family. So again, you know, the government not living up to its promises. Well, once they got to Florida, it was bad news. Remember, these are people that are used to living in high mountain areas, and now they're in the mucky, high humidity Florida environment. People started dying from disease, dying from malnutrition. The government started cutting back on the rations because they were living close to the ocean. They said these people should be fishing to supplement their food. Well, the Apaches didn't eat fish. It was something they did not eat. So you know, once again, the government was messing things up. Well, they went to Mount Vernon in Louisiana, and then somebody's turn your mic off, please. Thank you. Where was it? Oh, so they finally wind up at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and Geronimo lives out his life at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. But during this time, he really embraced the American culture. I mean, he was like the school superintendent at the elementary school. He encouraged the young men to join special military units, and he was given his own uniform. He went to various fairs and exhibited around the country. And in fact, he was even part of Theodore Roosevelt's inaugural parade in Washington, D.C. And so in this picture, there's Geronimo right there. And so Geronimo, I think this is great. Geronimo raises his lance and gives out a shout, and old Theodore takes off his hat and salutes Geronimo. And so I think it's a great scene. After that, years later, Geronimo, he enjoyed a drink or two. And one night he was on a drinking spree, stayed out all night in the cold and the wet, came down with pneumonia and died. Now he had at least 2 children that we know of. They went to the Mescalero Apache reservation in New Mexico, and there are a lot of his descendants today through that particular wife. So now if we switch to Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull lived from approximately 1831 to 1890. His name in English really doesn't grasp what the name means in Lakota. It means a strong bison buffalo who, when surrounded, will sit down on his haunches and fight courageously to the death. And I think that's a great image. Of course, you can't really express it that way in English, that huge long name, but a strong bull buffalo surrounded will sit down on his haunches and fight courageously to the death. And I think that really showcases, it's the epitome of who Sitting Bull was. He had a traditional Lakota upbringing in the Hunkpapa tribe of the Lakotas. He learned how to hunt, including buffalo. The lance was his favorite weapon. He counted coup as a young man. He was wounded in battle, and he took lives of his enemies. He was considered a generous and kind man. He was a holy man. Osachu Wakan, is that how you say it correctly? Okay, slight nod of it. And anyway, he was a holy man, which means he could communicate with Wankan Tonkan, the great holy. And during his lifetime, Sitting Bull received several visions which came true. People believed that he could talk with animals, and the meadowlark was his favorite bird to communicate with. I think this is a great story. This, when he was a young man, he was out hunting, he took a nap, and he had a dream that a woodpecker told him to lie still. And he opened his eyes, and there he saw a woodpecker, and then he saw there was a bear right there. And so he lay still, and then the bear snuffed at him and went away. So from that point on, Sitting Bull always honored the birds because they saved his life. So it's a great story. Well, as I said, he's always considered kind. This is a story about Frank Groward. Groward was delivering dispatches to a fort. He was during the winter. He was captured by a couple of warriors. And he was wearing this big bear coat. And these warriors were trying to kill him. And he grabbed the one and would swing the guy around so the other guy couldn't shoot. And Sitting Bull and the others ride up, and they see what's going on here in the snow. And they see the big bear coat. And Sitting Bull thinks it's a bear that's grappling with him. And then he realizes it's a man, and he starts laughing. And he tells these two guys to stop, that he wants to save this guy. And so he saved Frank Groward and adopted him as his brother. And he lived with him for a couple of years. And then Gerard went against Sitting Bull, did a couple of wrong things, and left. And then from there on out, he turned on him. He was a scout for the army, leading troops out to where the Lakota villages were. So, unfortunately, he turned on Sitting Bull. But time and time again, Sitting Bull would do things like this. He would save somebody from certain death. Sitting Bull was at peace with the whites until about the 1860s, when troops came into Dakota Territory in pursuit of the Dakotas from Minnesota. And so the troops started attacking anybody they came upon. And from that time on then, Sitting Bull was at war with the whites. Gold was discovered in Montana, and riverboats are going up the river. They're cutting down trees for fuel. They're killing all the game and building forts along the way. And the Lakota did not like that, because that was their land. And how dare these people, I mean, rightfully so, come in and take their resources without paying for them. So they were at war. And when the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 was signed, there were many that did not sign it. Sitting Bull was one of those who did not sign the treaty of 1868. He and others were still at war. Well, in the early 1870s, they were surveying through what's now North Dakota and Montana for a railroad right away. And Sitting Bull had his first run-in with Custer during that time period. And at one point, the Lakotas almost had Custer and his men cut off from the main body, but the main body came up in time and ran off the warriors who had them surrounded. But as they continued along, the Lakota would attack. And at this one point in Montana, they'd been attacking all day, and a lot of the young men were getting injured. And Sitting Bull said, okay, enough, everybody has won enough honor here. We don't want anybody to get killed. Well, one guy did get killed. And he said, okay, let's stop, and nobody would stop. And he was the leader at the time, and they wouldn't listen to him. But what he did was he got off his horse, and he had a limp, and he slowly walked down the hill towards the soldiers until he got within range where they could actually hit him with their muskets, their rifles, their carbines. He sat down and he pulled out his pipe and his tobacco, and he shouted over his shoulder, anybody that wants to come on down and smoke with me. And so 4 guys came down. They sat with Sitting Bull in a line, and they smoked while everybody was shooting at them. No one got hit. And when they were done smoking, Sitting Bull said, all right, let's go. And they walked back up the hill. And to me, that just shows what kind of a person Sitting Bull was. He was courageous. And after that, when he got back up top, he said, okay, we're done. And everybody left. So just a pretty cool thing, I think. Well, in 1874, as probably most of you know, Custer led an expedition into the Black Hills, and gold was discovered, and it set off a gold rush into the Black Hills. And as you know, the Black Hills were part of the Great Sioux Nation, and no whites were supposed to be there without authorization. And for a time, the government made an attempt to keep these people out, but it was pretty much like herding fleas. And they, Dorinda, how am I doing on time? Am I,
You're doing okay.
okay, all right.
I'm not ready to give you the book yet.
Yeah, I thought you were going out for that, so I wasn't sure. So anyway, as part of the Great Sioux Reservation, they weren't supposed to be in there, but eventually the government turned a blind eye. In fact, even up to President Grant, they held a secret conference, and they decided, Crook was involved too, by the way, and they said, well, we're not going to boot anybody out of the Black Hills anymore. And this was in the fall of 1875. At the same time, the Lakota took matters into their own hands, and they were turning back people and or killing them along the way. And so finally the government said, okay, everybody has to come into the agencies, or else you'll be considered hostile and you will be attacked. Well, the message went out in December of 1875, and all the villages had until the end of January 1876 to come into their agencies. Sitting Bull's agency, which he never went to up to that point, was at Standing Rock on the Missouri River. He was out beyond the Little Missouri River, out that way, and continued heading further west. So whether he got the message or not, we don't know. He never came in. But I think the ludicrous thing about this, I mean, we all live here, except for some of you on the internet, in South Dakota, and we all know what the winters are like in December, January here. And it was so bad at that time, Custer and the 7th Cavalry they were stationed at Fort Abraham Lincoln, and they were told to go out in the middle of the winter. And they said, sorry, we can't go out because the weather is so extreme right now. So imagine that, Custer and 7th Cavalry can't go out during the time period that these family groups were required to, bundle up the children and bring them into Standing Rock. So again, a ludicrous thing that the federal government came up with. So they didn't come in. A lot of people didn't come in. Whether they got the message or not, they didn't come in. Now, on a personal note, I believe that the federal government would have waited until the hunting bands ran out of food out there. If the buffalo were eventually going to go, they would have come in voluntarily without having to send the army out after. Well, anyway, in the spring, a lot of the hunting parties started banding together because good old Crook, he had marched up through Wyoming to about where Sheridan is today, and they fought the Battle of Rosebud. Crook retreated from there. Custer and his men with Terry's column were coming from the east, and Gibbon was coming from the west. They were all converging to try to bring in the Lakota attack, if you will. And just again to set the scene, I mean, they were in what was called the unceded land. It was part of the Great Sioux Reservation. They had a right to be there at the time, but yet they were attacked. Well, Sitting Bull, in one of his visions, he did a sun dance, and he cut pieces of flesh as an offering, and he received a vision that soldiers would be falling into camp head first, which meant they would be attacked, but they would win. And lo and behold, in June 25th, 1876, Custer and his men attack Sitting Bull's massive village on the Little Bighorn. Custer and a lot of his men were killed during that time. And in my book, I concentrate on Sitting Bull's involvement in the battle. He was there encouraging the young men to go out. I mean, he was older at the time, so that would have been a job to encourage young men, and again, to also protect the women and children. And so he did both, because they didn't know who was attacking them. They didn't know what direction they were coming from. And so all the women and children went out to one area, and the older men went out there to protect the women after they made sure everything else was taken care of. Well, after that battle, the army goes after Sitting Bull and his people, and they fight him off for a while, but they finally figure, why not cross the border into Canada? You know, the Canadians are at peace with them, so they go up there, and they're there for a few years until food runs out for them, and they finally, Sitting Bull and his band finally have to give up, and they come back down to what's now Fort Buford in North Dakota, and he surrenders July 20th, 1881. Now, at his surrender, he hands his rifle to his young son to give to the commander. And I would like to read to you what Sitting Bull says when he hands that over. Okay, he's handing the gun over. And by the way, I should say, he has the bandage around his head, kind of covering his eyes, because he had some sort of eye problems, eye disease at the time. His eyes were hurting him at the time. And if you ever see, there's a picture of him wearing goggles at some point, and they gave him those goggles to help protect his eyes. So anyway, this is what he says to the commander, Botherton. I surrender this rifle to you through my young son, whom I now desire to teach in the manner that he has become a friend of the Americans. I wish him to learn the habits of the whites and to be educated as their sons are educated. I wish it to be remembered that I was the last man of my tribe to surrender my rifle. This boy has given it to you, and he now wants to know, how is he going to make a living? I thought that's pretty cool. Sitting Bull saying, okay, we surrender, we're going to do it your way, but how are we going to make a living? You know, tell us. Well, after the surrender, he was told they would be going to Standing Rock, but the government, again, in their infinite wisdom, decides to make him and his whole band prisoners of war, and they take them to Fort Randall, Dakota Territory for a couple of years. No one told him what was going to happen to him. I mean, imagine living day to day, not knowing what's going to happen. Where am I going? I know I got to speed it up here. So finally, the government relents. They send him to Standing Rock to join the rest of the Hunkpapas there. Well, also there is Agent John McLaughlin. Sitting Bull and McLaughlin clash. I mean, big time. Sitting Bull and his family finally settle on the Grand River, where he raises crops, livestock. He asks for a school to be located nearby, and that's granted. For one season, the government actually allows him to go with Buffalo Bill on his Wild West. And Buffalo Bill and Sitting Bull become good friends. And Sitting Bull becomes good friends with Annie Oakley, whom he names Little Sure Shot, which I think that's pretty cool that he gave her the nickname. This photo here, Sitting Bull liked to dress like that when he wasn't performing. And he enjoyed young children. And he would see these orphans, these little ragamuffins running around, and he would give them money. I mean, I just think that's so cool that he felt concerned for these orphan children, that he would care for them. Well, he was only allowed one season with, after that first season, McLaughlin didn't like Sitting Bull going out with Buffalo Bill, and he was never allowed to go out again. Well, this is not in the book, but I really like this picture. The federal government is trying to break up the Great Sioux Reservation into smaller, indistinct reservations. And a Lakota delegation goes in 1888 to say to the federal government, no, we don't want to break things up, we want to leave it the way it is. And they actually won out for about a year or so. But in this picture, I'll point him out, here's Sitting Bull standing here. It's a little distinct from everybody else. But notice the hat he has in his hand here. It's a broad-brimmed, lighter colored hat. Well, Buffalo Bill had given Sitting Bull a broad-brimmed, light-colored hat. And I don't know for a fact that this is, but I like to think that that's the hat that Buffalo Bill gave him because of his favorite hat. He wouldn't let anybody else touch it. One time somebody put it on and he scolded that person for putting on his special hat. So yeah, they went there and they won for a while, but then it was broken up. About 1889 into the 1890s, a new religion was sweeping through the Indian nations called the Ghost Dance. As people danced, they thought they could see loved ones who had died, and that there would be a new world coming. Sitting Bull was curious about it, and he invited some of the dancers to his community to put on a dance. He danced once, and he didn't see anything. Nothing happened, nothing special. And he was skeptical about it, but other people thought they were seeing things. And so he allowed people to continue to dance at his community. Agent McLaughlin didn't like that. He didn't like the dance. There was a lot of whites that were scared of it. And the government asked McLaughlin for a list of characters who were putting that on. And of course, Sitting Bull was at the top of the list. The government ordered Sitting Bull to be arrested. McLaughlin sent out his Indian police, and the arrest went bad. Tempers flared, shots were fired. Tragically, Sitting Bull, some of his supporters and some of the Indian police died there. And again, that's something that should not have happened. None of that. So wrap things up here. Yikes. Geronimo and Sitting Bull wanted to preserve and continue their ways of life. They really just wanted to be left alone and continue in the traditions of their people. I'd like to close with a remark from Sitting Bull and a remark from Geronimo. First, Geronimo, and this is at the end of his autobiography. It says, meaning Arizona, is my land, my home, my father's land, to which I now ask to be allowed to return. I want to spend my last days there and be buried among those mountains. If this could be, I might die in peace, feeling that my people, placed in their native homes, would increase in numbers rather than diminish as at present, and that our name would not become extinct. And then for Sitting Bull, as part of his Sitting Bull speech before the Senate Select Committee in 1883, he said, "I am looking into the future for my children, the Lakotas. And that is what I mean when I say I want my country taken care of for me. My children will grow up here, and I am looking ahead for their benefit and for the benefit of my children's children too, and even beyond that." And so I'll end it with their words and open it up for questions. Do we have time for questions? Okay, so questions? I'll get out of the, how do I get out of the PowerPoint? Do I just end this so that they can see?
Well, that's Crystal.
Because I think Holly said that it would show up on the screen that people can see the audience. That's online. Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. Maybe can you zero in on us? Or no, I don't.
Yeah.
It's probably fine.
Individuals should be able to modify their own so that
Okay, all right, great, thanks. Okay, questions?
How long did it take you to write this book?
That's a really good question. I never have a good answer for it. It was about a year, and I put a heck of a lot of time. You can ask Liz, I was putting in like 10, 12-hour days on this, just a ton of research. And then trying to find what was correct. There's a lot of misinformation out there, and trying to figure out what's right as opposed to what was wrong. It's tough. More questions? Yeah, Sean.
Did Sitting Bull and Geronimo ever meet?
No, they never did. Although that would make a great fiction book, wouldn't it? It was always, Sitting Bull was out there for that one time, but Geronimo, he really made the circuit. He was all over the place. And, he even got to see some of the first moving pictures, and he thought they were just great. He loved farming scenes, and he loved wildlife scenes on the movie pictures. Can we take some from the internet? I don't know how to do that. If there's anybody out there. In the meantime, sir, yeah.
I was just gonna say, if you click on the chat button there, it'll have some questions for you probably, Bill.
Okay.
The very bottom in the middle.
Very bottom.
It's a red.
See,
The little
everybody-
red 5, yeah.
Oh, it's fine. Okay, right. So, oops. I think I'm just going to get a question for Bill. No, it's all just housekeeping stuff right here. Actually, they're all nasty comments.
Bill?
No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Yes, yeah.
Bill, if you look at the last question from Ida. Oh,
I see that. Okay. Any surprises while writing this book? Well, yeah, I think almost every day there was a surprise. These people, both men were very caring for their people. Now, I would say in some ways, Sitting Bull maybe, I hate to say this, but Sitting Bull maybe more than Geronimo in a way. Geronimo was always let's see, how can I say this gracefully? He would sacrifice an individual to keep the rest of the group cohesive, if that makes sense. I mean, especially when they're being attacked by Mexicans or something. Okay, we got to leave so-and-so behind because if we do, we could all be rubbed out, So, but they had their people, I believe, their benefit was number one with them. And they both had senses of humor. I think we missed that. I think they both had good senses of humor at times. And, once they ended their warfare for good, then they tried to take the best of what they could find in the white society and use that for the benefit of their people. I think that was good. Yeah.
Bill, in your research, How much before Geronimo did Cochise die?
Say it again, how much what?
Yeah, Cochise, I know Cochise he died.
Yes.
And they don't know where he's buried at.
Right.
Ever, but did he die 10, 15
Oh.
years before Geronimo?
Yeah, oh, yeah. Cochise died, let's see, I want to say mid 1870s. And I think he had maybe, they don't know for sure, but maybe some sort of maybe a stomach cancer or something like that. He's kind of wasted away. But yes, no one knows where he was buried at, which is a good thing, I believe. Because, I mean, look at all the dumb things people do with people's bodies.
Were you able to find out definitively where Sitting Bull was actually buried?
Well, of course, he's in South Dakota.
Well, there's
No.
48.
I know. I said that facetiously. I read a whole. I've got a whole series of book coming out, chapter coming out on that. But for those of you that don't know, Sitting Bull was originally buried. They hauled his body back to Fort Yates, buried him in the military cemetery there, unceremoniously. And then years later, of course, the Fort Yates moved away. They moved all the soldiers out, but they left his body there. And the grave was pretty much unattended. I mean, there was a little slab of concrete poured over top. Anyway, back in the 1950s, Clarence Gray Eagle, who was his nephew, got Sitting Bull's daughters to agree to have his body removed from Fort Yates and brought down to across from Mobridge, where that monument is today. So I could do an hour-long lecture on that whole deal, but people in North Dakota said, they got the wrong body, and so it was big content. Ghouls from South Dakota steal Sitting Bull's body. Newspaper headlines were blaring back. There's a newspaper war between South Dakota and North Dakota at the time. But if you ever go there, he has two monuments. I mean, there's one at Fort Yates. It's very nice, very pretty, and then there's the one across from Mobridge, which is very nice too. So Sherilyn's been there plenty of time, I'm sure. And you too, Lon, I'm sure. Yeah. Any other questions?
Bill, this is Catherine. Evelyn wants to know, did writing the book change your thoughts about Sitting Bull and Geronimo?
No, I think they reinforced them. Well, maybe with Sitting Bull, they reinforced them. I always liked Sitting Bull, and I really came to admire him as I wrote this. I mean, I wish I could have met him. Yeah, just a pretty neat guy. Geronimo.
You would have probably liked it because he had the gift of words, just like you.
Well, I don't know about me, but he was
very
pretty neat guy.
Eloquent.
And Geronimo, I would not have wanted to met him when he was on the warp. But later on, when he was, giving out autographs, so he would do things like he'd sell somebody would want to buy his hat, he'd sell it for $5. And then he'd go dig in a trunk and pull out another hat and sell that for $5. I mean, he made a lot of money at the time. It was great. So I mean, just when he stopped warring, then he became an entrepreneur. So
we have one more.
Great, time for one more.
Sure.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
Edith says, "You've written much. Congrats. What's the same or the difference about your writing process for this book versus your previous works?"
I don't know. Okay. With this one, I wanted to make sure that I was respectful of these cultures, because I am not Lakota, I am not Apache. And I wanted to be respectful, and I wanted to try as much as I could to tell the story from their viewpoints. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized that the government really did wrong on both counts. And if you think about it, they're doing it wrong with two different tribal groups that are totally separated from each other by, 1,000 miles, whatever. They're doing it to everybody out there. And so that was a real eye opener to me. And it was an eye opener to me too about, a guy like General Crook, who when he was, when he went to Standing Rock to try to get signatures to break up the Great Sioux Reservation, they said, well, a lot of the men that signed said, well, we'll do this, but you got to ensure that our racial allotments will not be diminished. And he said, yeah, don't worry about it. You'll get the same allotments. Well, a few months later after that, guess what? The allotments, the food allotments were diminished. And Crook knew about it. When he was telling them they won't be diminished, he knew the government was, because the Congress had already said we're going to diminish the allotments. And so to me, he lied there, and he did it again and again. And so, whenever someone says Crook was the great peacemaker, I kind of snicker at that. But anyway, I got far afield, but I had people fact check for me that one guy grew up on Apache reservation, and another's an enrolled member of Standing Rock to try to get, again, I wanted to make sure I'm respectful and get as close to the real facts. You can never get 100% right on things. But I like what a biographer of Jesse James said. He said, I'm not 100% accurate. I know I'm not 100% accurate, but I'm 100% honest. And I kind of like that. So maybe I'll end with that. So thanks everybody, and thanks for coming out.